Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th intermediate Java class. Today we're just going to be doing a review of all the stuff that we've covered in previous lessons. So let's get started. So far we've learned about classes and objects, arrays, and array lists. In addition to the review that we did at the beginning of the course, let's start by reviewing classes and objects. So let's start with an overview of what classes usually contain. Normally in our classes we have instance variables, we have our static variables if we have any, methods, a constructor, and we can use those classes to create objects. So let's start by looking at instance variables. So instance variables should always be private. You can make them public, but it's always good practice to make your instance variables private and then make sure that they can only be accessed using setters and getters. So remember that setters and getters are the methods that you make to be able to access and mutate or change your instance variables. So your instance variables are basically the variables that are tied with the objects or the instances of your class. When you create an instance of your class or you create an object using that class, those instance variables are tied directly to the object that you create, and they give you certain pieces of data about that object. For example, for a rectangle class, you could have length and width as your instance variables. They would tell you the length of a particular rectangle or the width of a particular rectangle. Similarly, for the car class, you could have the model of the car and the speed of the car be instance variables. For any instance of the car class, these variables would tell you what the car model and what the car's speed would be. And to get these variables, you could use setters and getters as shown on the slide. You could use the method getModel, or you could use the method setModel. In addition to getters and setters, we can also use other types of methods. So most of our methods when we're coding in this course have been getters and setters. So we mainly used setters to change instance variables and getters to return an instance variable or use it or get it back or get its value to use in some other operation. But we can also use methods to do other things as well. For example, you might remember that we had a getArea method in our rectangle class. This method would return the area of a rectangle or a particular rectangle by multiplying its length and width. You can also look at an example like for example pow. The method pow in the math class gives you the result when you take one number to the power of another number. So there are two types of methods, non-static methods and static methods. Non-static methods are methods that are not static. That means they depend directly on the instance of the class that you're using. Whereas static methods do not require an object or an instance of your class. They work completely independent of the instance variables. For example, pow in the math class is a static method because it does not depend on any instance variables. For this reason, you call it using math.pow, the name of the class, and then the static method. In addition to our usual methods, we also have the constructor. The constructor is a special method that has a different declaration. It has the declaration public, and then your class name, and then inside of the parentheses, you would put, just like normal, your arguments for the function or the method. These arguments are usually assignments to the instance variables. So for each of your instance variables, you would set it to some initial state. So you also have a default constructor, which Java creates for you automatically. This default constructor does absolutely nothing. It has no arguments, and it does nothing in its code. However, you can overwrite this default constructor by writing your own constructors, as shown in the image. By doing this, you can create a class where the instance variables start at some starting value and you can change them later on. You can use the constructor to create objects or instances of a certain class. For example, if you wanted to create a certain instance or object from the car class, you could use the second constructor and create a new object of type car. So you could say car C is equal to a new car, and then put in the arguments for the constructor that you would like to use. By calling the constructor, you are getting a new car object. And after you do that, you are setting this new car object to C. And so C will be a new car object, and based on the constructor, it will have a speed of 10 and a model of X5. So, we talked about how you can create objects or instances of a class. So, objects are basically instances of a class, and they have values in the instance variables. So, you can use these objects to call non-static methods. And these non-static methods will do things with the instance variables and give you things that you want to do with the object. So to call a method or a non-static method with a certain object, you would do object name dot method name, where method name can only be used. We're using this mainly for non-static methods. For static methods, you would just use the class name, so it would be class name dot method name. Okay, now let's talk about arrays. So arrays are basically collection or lists of data. Their indices go from 0 to 1 less than the length of the array. They can store objects and they can store primitive types like ints and doubles. Their size cannot change throughout your code. However, you can add and remove elements by creating new arrays with different lengths and then copying over the values from the original arrays to the new arrays. Now let's talk about array lists. Array lists are very similar to arrays. They have indices going from 0 to 1 less than their size. There is a difference between array lists and arrays though, and this is that array lists are a class whereas arrays are not a class. And in addition, array lists can change size whereas arrays cannot change size. Also, array lists can only hold objects and they cannot hold primitive types, whereas arrays can hold both. So since arrays are a class, or array lists are a class, they can have methods. And in fact, they do have methods. For example, there's the size method, and we'll see that on the next slide. But for now, you can see that one specific method that you might use a lot is the size method. Whereas an array, you can call the length of an array. The array lists have a size method that gives you the size or the length of an array list. So below you can see the way to declare a new array list. You would start by saying array list, the type of the data that's going to be held by the array list, in this case string, so we have array list of a strings. Then you type the name of the array list, in this case it was list, and then you use the equals and new keyword, and then you call the constructor for the array list. So array list of strings, and then you call the empty constructor. So here's some of the methods that we discussed about array lists. There's the size method that calls and returns the size of the array list. There's the add method. This add method can add a new object to the array list if you provide the index and the object. You can also remove an object by removing calling the remove method on either the object or the index. You can also use the get method, which returns a certain element at a certain index. You can use the set method to set a certain index to an object. Finally, you can also use the indexOf method to find the first index that holds an object. Okay, so today we're going to be mainly focusing on our exercises. So here are some of the exercises that you have to do. Start by creating a circle class with an instance variable for the radius. So you should create setters, getters, and also a getArea method for this class. You can remember that the area of a circle is equal to pi times the radius squared. You can use 3.14 for the value of pi. You can also use math.pi. For your second exercise, create an array of 10 circle objects with radii from 1 to 10 and print their areas. You should use the circle class that you created in the first exercise. For your third exercise, create an array list of circles the same way as before. Then loop through and print each of these circles. So here you should use a loop to print all of the circles in the array list. Then create a method in the circle class called compareArea. This should accept a circle as a parameter, and it should return the difference between the areas of the circle that you applied the method on and the circle that was accepted as a parameter. So as a hint, you should use the keyword this to use the current class or the current instance that you're using. So for example, in a method, you would, if you said this dot getArea, I believe that was the name of the method. Yes. So if you called this dot getArea, that would get the area of this circle, or the current instance that the method is being called in. For your final exercise, remember that piggy bank class that you made in a previous exercise? Create a new method in that class called combine. It should accept a new piggy bank as a parameter, and it should combine the two piggy banks by moving all the coins into the other piggy bank. The other one should have 0 coins, and the first one should have more coins. That's what it means when we say transfer or combine. That's all for today's class, and we hope you got a good review out of it, and we hope you can solve the exercises, and we hope you enjoyed them. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next lesson.